What's up, everybody? I'm Jesse Zerwell, and welcome to this episode of Facts on the Ground. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Misty Winston. And today we're happy to have back on the show Danny Sjursen. He's a former Army major. He's taught at West Point, and he's since become an anti-war activist, writer, podcaster. His podcast that he co-hosts is called Fortress on the Hill, or Fortress on a Hill, Fortress on the Hill, and I recommend subscribing to that. And he is the author of several books, including Patriotic Descent, and a new one that is coming out in June, I believe you said. And it's called A True History of the United States. So we'll talk about that a little bit. But first, we're going to start with the collateral murder video that WikiLeaks released in 2010, the 11th anniversary of which is coming up on April 5th. And we're going to go from there into what's happening in Africa, especially sub-Saharan Africa, with regard to both French and American military operations there, a lot of which aren't being talked about, despite the severity of these operations. So after that long intro, I'd like to say, Danny, thank you for joining us again. And it's always good to talk to you.
Thanks so much for having me. These are, Steve will be upset, but these are like my favorite conversations in media. Like, they really are, because who knows where it's going to go, but it's going to expose some indecency, and there'll be some books along the way.
And please believe me, I am going to be bragging to Steve Poikonen about the fact that you just said that.
I'm sure I'll get
that. Will be something. Yeah, that will be something I will be rubbing in shortly.
He'll have to bring me on. He'll have to bring me back on his show to try to one up you guys.
Yes, he will. We have a little competitive thing about that going back and forth. But he gets Whitney Webb, so it's fair. Anyways, so as Jesse mentioned, we do want to kind of start off with the anniversary of the collateral murder video, which is, as we mentioned, on Monday, April 5th. It's kind of a huge time right now, just because April 5th is the 11-year anniversary of the release of Collateral Murder, and then April 11th will be the 2-year anniversary. I don't even know if you can call it an anniversary. I call it tragiversary on Twitter, because anniversary seems like something to celebrate, and this is nothing to celebrate, but that will be the 2-year anniversary or tragiversary of Julian Assange being kidnapped from the Ecuadorian embassy. So it's, kind of an action-packed week. And so I really just wanted to kind of, given that you were in the military and you have that background, and I just kind of wanted to see what your take was on the impact of the release of the collateral murder video, and kind of where you think that we're headed now, given we have a Biden administration who is obviously no friend to press freedom and is continuing the prosecution of Julian Assange. Just what's your general take on kind of the impact that we've seen over the last 11 years?
First of all, we're on the same page when it comes to Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning and all of it. But I have to say, every time I talk about this subject, thank you again, enemy of the state, enemy of the empire, Julian Assange, and that's in quotes, for exposing this. The New York Times hasn't done anything remotely as important since at least the Pentagon Papers, right? And even that was complicated, The exposure of the collateral murder video was, I thought, a very visceral and instructive anecdote of what that war was, which the Iraq War was, of course, illegal in its inception, and it was wildly brutal in its execution. So it was important, and it impacted folks. It was an important story. But if I'm allowed to be a little bit dark, I will say we're hitting in the 11th anniversary or commemoration or date on the calendar of something that most people don't even know is an anniversary. and no one really gives a shit about. And I don't mean no one, but I mean the vast majority. Like, this should be in the category. This falls, the whole Iraq war logs release, the whole collateral murder, everything that came out, right, in 2010, falls squarely in the category I often call stuff that should be a scandal but isn't.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a scandal, but in the sense of, like, what is the long-term impact? Well, I think it affected certain individuals. I think it energized some anti-war people. It affected a lot of progressives, but it had no impact, really, not in any real sense, on the decisions of the imperial presidency. Because foreign policy in the United States, war policy, the most profound thing government does is run from the White House, from the Oval Office. I mean, it's run by a cabal of unelected advisors like Jake the Snake Sullivan, right? Which I shall ever call him, because I watched WWF in the 90s. You know, these are the people making our policy and doing all this in our name. So I don't think it's had a massive impact, but that in itself is instructive and important, because it tells us how policy is made in the United States. Congress has completely absented itself from its delegated duties, right? It's prescribed duties in the Constitution to oversee war. However, I still think it was a silver lining sort of gift of Julian Assange and WikiLeaks and all of that to release it. What's interesting to me, and I can go in a million directions with this, but I'll pause in a bit and let you guys direct it. But that war, which is still going on, no one even knows the mission anymore. I want to be sent to Iraq and poll soldiers. I mean, yeah, I was an officer, but I have a vague idea how to talk to soldiers, right? And I smoke cigarettes, which is rare for an officer. So that right there, they'll open up. You know, I'll go to the smoking pit. I want to ask them what they're doing in Iraq, right? We got a few thousand soldiers there still. They could never tell you. They would laugh. I mean, I know soldiers, they would laugh. They'd be like, oh, we're here because we're here. It's a mercenary admission in a way. And I don't necessarily mean that as a knock at them personally, right? Everyone has their own reasons for getting into the military. They're not innocents. You know, they don't deserve our fetishization. But at the same time, I'm not like attacking them by saying that. But it's a mercenary's answer. You know, the French Foreign Legion is in the Sahara fighting Berbers and whatever because they're the French Foreign Legion, because they're a mercenary element. And I think the U.S. military is increasingly like that. But the bottom line about the Iraq mission today isn't it ironic that the military institution that murdered from the sky, I mean, as we saw in that video, if you watch that video, it reminds me of like Hannah Arendt, The Banality of Evil. The story in that video is a lot of things, right? It's like all the different details of why they blew up certain people, why they blew up certain apartments, and the lack of oversight. But I watched that video. By the way, I know the call signs of the helicopters. Crazy, right? I used to call those call signs. I was in Iraq calling the air support from those guys. They blew up buildings for me. You know, they took out snipers for me. It's that resonates, but it's the banter. It's the carefree banter of these pilots who go home and get put on the 50-yard line and get parades in their little towns.
Right.
Fetishized as the most beautiful and the highest order of American human being, and they banter offhandedly and uncritically.
Yeah, they're sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to add to that I totally agree, and they're like these grotesque Freudian slips into the psychology of the soldiers, the pilots, the gunners, etc., who were involved in that, and so many other incidents, countless incidents probably. But
it sounds like they're playing a video game, you know,
right?
Like that. There's no, it's not actual human lives. I mean, they're talking about children being in the van, and they're like, "That's what you get for bringing kids to a gunfight." Really? Those are children. Like, what's wrong with you? And I actually,
I'm going to say it again because I really wish somebody would do this. I don't have the technical skills to do it. But I recently came up with an idea to have like a video made of a couple of little kids playing with like kind of like a setup like you would see in the collateral murder video, and then have the audio from the collateral murder video playing in the background. Because you're right, we hold our military up as like these, heroes, these people we should be looking up to, role models for our children. And then you watch the collateral murder video. Is that really what you want your kids looking up to? So I thought that that would be a really powerful juxtaposition of having these kids act out that scene as the audio is playing behind them. So anybody with the skills to make that video should do that. You don't even have to give me credit for it. I would be totally fine with that. Because it is really, really gross. I don't know how anybody could watch that video and not be just unbelievably disturbed.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm recently there's been released on Amazon a new documentary called I don't know, Love and War with Tim O'Brien. You know, Tim O'Brien is this Vietnam author, novelist, quasi memoir.
I read The Things They Carried, In the Lake of the Woods, and Going After Cacciato.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, he wrote in The Things They Carried is that like amazing 10 pages that like should be required reading before you're even allowed to walk into a recruiting station, called How to Tell a True War Story. And like, just to quote from it a little bit, like I think about this when I think about the way we fetishize soldiers now. I think we do a disservice. We disrespect our soldiers by like adulating and fetishizing them uncritically. I think that we should, if you appreciate aspects of what soldiers do, then one of the ways to do that is to tell the truth about them, and to describe them accurately and maybe love them for their faults, not in spite of them, because I just think that's always a better thing. But he says in that short story, he said, a true war story is never moral. It does not instruct, nor encourage virtue, nor suggest models of proper human behavior. If at the end of a war story you feel uplifted, or if you feel that some small bit of rectitude has been salvaged from the larger waste, then you have been made the victim of a very old and terrible lie. There is no virtue. As a first rule of thumb, therefore, you can tell a true war story by its absolute and uncompromising allegiance to obscenity and evil. And that's what got me thinking about Hannah Arendt. The banality of evil, the banality of the banter of those pilots. And, look to the language. We've said this on the show a million times. Hitchens, look to the language. Well, if you actually deconstruct their language, I mean, I wonder if this has been done by people who do linguistics, right? Like like Chomsky's actual, kind of PhD work. Like if you deconstructed what they're saying, I mean, it exposes a degree of racism and moral lassitude that most people hear it and they don't really think those things. But if you actually listen to what they're saying, the offhanded and breezy way that they speak of killing, and the excitement to get the approval to kill more, I think that is actually a window into the psychology of war and soldiers and sort of what it does. And I'm not obviating them of responsibility by saying that, but O'Brien also said, in the same story, he said, you can tell a true war story if it embarrasses you. If you don't care for obscenity, you don't care for the truth. If you don't care for the truth, watch how you vote. Send guys to war, they come home talking dirty. Well, I would add, send guys to war, and a percentage of them are going to commit war crimes. So be careful how you vote, and be careful when you send us over there, because you're sending inherently flawed 19-year-old human beings. And I don't trust human beings as far as I can throw them. And I love human beings, despite it all, for my sins. My point is, that video it's a monument. It's a time capsule to a moment in that war and what that war was, that I wish every night before I go to sleep, Americans still remembered and really cared about, because that war is probably the most instructive thing about America that's happened since we dropped the atomic bomb. I really believe that.
Yeah. And also with the way you hear the pilots and the gunners speaking, it's almost as if they're so inured to what they've been doing that the cadence of their speech nearly matches the cadence of the gunfire of these. I don't know what millimeter ammunition they were firing into those people in that van, but it was enough to move the van around, rotate it, not to mention rip these people to shreds. But it seems to me almost as if the cadence of the crimes they've been carrying out seeped into their language and became part of their, not just their internal psyche, but how they communicated as well. So,
well, Jesse, I mean, I think you're on something really interesting and creative there. I mean, I'd like to see you write an article that basically said something to the effect of, the cadence of their language matched the cadence of the mechanistic fire of the cannon. I mean, they become their ordinance. The human being becomes his tool, and I mean, and that's not just metaphorical, artistic. I mean, there's something to that. I think you're on something actually really kind of beautiful, and by beautiful, I guess I mean like in a tragic way. But this is what happens: the people become the enemy. The operation, as we all know, that they were carrying out was still called Operation Iraqi Freedom. Operation Iraqi Freedom is a euphemism extraordinaire that might as well stand as a symbol of what America has always been, which is one big delusional euphemism, right?
mm-hmm.
Very self-righteous one too, like very arrogant. I mean, but Operation Iraqi Freedom was supposed to be only one of them. It was supposed to all be over in a few months. When I got there in late October of 2006, we were on Operation Iraqi Freedom 4, I guess. What ended up happening is the war went on so long that they started giving a number, and it was always a Roman numeral, which I thought was fascinating. They started naming, like officially, they were naming the deployments. So people would write in their bios and stuff, and in their like resumes for like their next job, like, oh, he's a veteran of OIF, we'd say Operation Iraqi Freedom, OIF 1, 3, and 5.
Huh.
Like that is fascinating because it gets to what you're saying, which is that it becomes systemic and like routine.
Clinical.
It does. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a clinical aspect to it that I think is not just a function of the bureaucracy behind it, but a function of the bureaucracy's attempt to sterilize what they're doing.
Well, and it's just such a machine. It's so
right.
Cold and precise and unforgiving, and it's just and repetitive. And anything that is repeated over and over and over again becomes habit. And that's what this country is made from. And that's just, it's sort of ingrained in our culture that we just don't care. We just don't care. It seems like, I mean, we were talking about how, or Danny was talking about how people don't care about collateral murder, and about the, Iraq war logs and all of these things that Julian Assange has released. And it's because we've been like systematically programmed to think that that's normal. It's been normalized. That's where we come from. And so it's like, oh, it's just another day in the US of A where we're, terrorizing the globe. And that's what makes it so terrifying, is that it really is just sort of culturally ingrained in us. And I don't know how to combat that. It just seems like it's so just set. Like, I don't know how to get people to see outside of it. I don't know if that makes any sense at all.
It makes complete sense. And it makes me think of something else that I say that people don't like hearing. Robert Graves, World War I veteran, British, and then poet, wrote a book, Goodbye to All That, right? Which is kind of like he's saying goodbye to like his war service, but also to like aristocracy and the whole system that made it possible.
I love that title and that book.
Perfect. Yeah, I wrote my first piece in the LA Times, kind of riffed on it, which is maybe why they were willing to pick it up. But I when I retired, I wrote it. But one of the things that I'm saying goodbye to all that about is the way that like polite society forgives and makes excuses for the war criminal behaviors of its warriors. There's like a strange empathy for soldiers that is too much empathy. I know that's a weird thing where they'll say like, yeah, but they've been through so much, and oh, they've seen their friends die, and oh, like, you know, what happens in war stays in war, like it's goddamn Vegas, you know. And no, goodbye. I'm sorry. I'm here to tell you I am a monster like anybody else. I would not want to be held to account for every aspect of my life and every action I've ever taken. But I'll tell you this, there were plenty of opportunities and there was plenty of anger and plenty of fear where I could have committed and gotten away with and known I would have gotten away with war crimes repeatedly, countless times. I will not make excuses for those pilots, and I will not make excuses for the soldiers who torture, and I will not make excuses for people who shot up villagers. Your humanity has to hold. You got to be Andy Dufresne sometimes. You got to be Lucas Jackson. You got to transcend the horror around you, and I do not accept the excuses. And I think that the fact that polite and even potentially liberal society will say, it's terrible what happened, but like also you got to feel bad for the soldiers. We put them in a tough situation. You bet your ass we did. We put them in a hopeless war that was illegal. And you know what? You find yourself in a hopeless war that's illegal, and you still don't gleefully shoot up civilians because, you know, it's like people in their relationships won't accept their boyfriend or girlfriend saying, I'm sorry I said that, but I was drunk. They'll be like, that's no excuse. But we'll make excuses for crimes against humanity because they happen to wear a uniform and it's a bad war. Well, wars are bad. We shouldn't do them. But when we're doing them, which we're going to keep doing, right? I mean, with polite Joe in charge, or anybody who would have won. No, I don't accept it. So if I was going to leave one message on this podcast, it would be screw all that. I make no excuses for my fellow soldiers. I disown them, and I don't give two shits about the excuses. So I don't know. I mean, I guess I'm passionate about that, but it's like I don't like civilians telling me, and I know how that sounds. I don't like people who've never been in war telling me that it's okay for people to act bad in war. Right. I'm like, no, I was there. Like, no, you can be a decent human being. I wasn't always perfect, and I was certainly sometimes indecent, but like you can maintain your humanity. And I don't know. I just think that's an important point. I don't want to put it all on the pilots. I don't want to put it all on the soldiers, but I also refuse to make that excuse. And no one says that. Why does nobody say that? I'm not that unique or smart or moral. I'm not like goddamn Gandhi. I'm a nightmare of a person. But like, why does nobody say that? Has you heard anyone on TV? Anyone
No.
Because
no.
No excuses for war crimes. I don't care.
Well, you're right, though. But it's because people are afraid because there is this fetishization of soldiers. And if you speak against them, you are suddenly anti-American and you're unpatriotic and you're a terrorist. And you cannot speak out against the military soldier. I mean, it's support the troops, it's a bumper sticker. You can't go against that narrative. And that's why I've always said I don't support I support the individual because I understand that each person got to where they are for their own reasons. And are there some people who are absolute monsters because the military can attract that type of personality? For sure. But there are also some just really decent people who, for whatever situation they found themselves in their lives, thought that the military was a way out. And there were a lot of people who were brainwashed into thinking that, like we were talking about, the military, they're heroes. You want to be a hero. You want to put on the uniform and get respect. And so I think a lot of people are brainwashed into that. But you're right. Once you get there, if you let that environment take your humanity, there is no excuse for that. There's just not.
Well, I think it's impossible eventually, depending on how many times, how long you're deployed to, and where you're at. But I think it's almost across the board impossible to have humanity in war. And I agree with what the late Robert Fisk wrote, that war is the total failure of the human spirit. And if that's what it is, how is it possible to keep your humanity in that? And I don't know the answer. I haven't been to war. I won't pretend like I have any clue how to answer that, but I do agree that it is the total failure of the human spirit, and thereby, like I said, if whatever humanity you have, it's going to quickly grind it down into pulp.
And I think as the collective, that's incredibly true. And it reminds me, and I'll only briefly divert to history, I promise, but there's this notion of the good war, that there's a good war. Liberals really like this idea, by the way, more than conservatives. Most conservatives just like war, but like liberals are like, they only like good wars, right? It's the mythos of a good war. And my point is always like Tim O'Brien's, like, be very careful how you vote. Be very careful about starting a war, not just because it's hard to get out of. Everyone always says that platitude, and it's true. Easy to get in, hard to get out of, you know. Once you beat the drum of war, and once you do it, no matter how good the cause, if there are any good causes, but no matter how good, horrible things are going to ensue. One example that strikes me. In 1940, okay, so World War II is the best war America ever fought, maybe along with the Civil War, right? That's how people view it, right? There's been called like the Good War, which are actually sarcastic takes on that war. But when the Germans bombed Rotterdam from the sky, it was really one of the first examples, besides the Spanish Civil War, of like planes bombing civilians indiscriminately.
Right.
And I believe a few hundred died, right? Civilians, Dutch. Roosevelt, like, gave this like very powerful speech about it. Like, this is the most inhumane thing. Like, how in the world could a society bomb civilians from the air? Now, we don't think of that as such a big deal because people have been bombing civilians in the air for a long time. But in 1940, it was a big deal. But not 5 years later, on March 9th and 10th, 1945, and I am not talking about the atom bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That comes later. Before that, on March 9th and 10th, 1945, the same government that's leader said, this is the most horrible thing, that the Germans bombed civilians in Rotterdam, incinerated and suffocated and boiled in the canals where they fled with their babies 95,000, mostly women, children, and old men in Tokyo in a night of firebombing that was designed and practiced to create a firestorm, purposeful, not accidental. So in other words, you get into a war and the collective humanity is going away because 5 years later, by the way, we're in year 20. 5 years later, we go from like bombing civilians at all and killing a few hundred is the most obscene thing that's ever happened in human nature to, well, I guess we're going to have to incinerate the Japanese to win. Well, that is one of those things where I have the delusion that if human beings really knew that fact and really grappled with it, maybe it would change something. Of course, I've learned that's not necessarily the case, but it bothers me. It bothers me. I think about that when I see people be unkind in the most routine ways, you know, and that's my problem. I mean, right, that's what makes me an insufferable person to be around. But like, I think about that anecdote I just told you about Rotterdam and then Tokyo in my human affairs in general, and it makes me very scared. I'm very scared of my fellow man. I love him, but I'm very scared. And I think the collateral murder video is kind of, it's like a 21st century tech savvy take on that old saw that I just described.
Yeah, and it makes me think of the Winter Soldier hearings, if you will, or testimonies that were given by Iraq War veterans. I believe it was in early 2009, and so many of them talked about how the environment was just carte blanche. You could correct me if I'm wrong, but shoot a kid in the head on the street of Baghdad and get away with it scot-free, and maybe come up with some excuse about he looked like he was reaching for something or looked like he was strapped with something. But it was basically, and I don't know what it's like now. I think it's still just as bad. I mean, look what they did to Mosul not so long ago. I think they're still digging people out of rubble there. But it yeah, it was just astounding to hear the just the free for all they were given to destroy another people whose country they were in are in illegally.
To free, right? To free them, right? To give them.
Yeah.
See, I mean, it's a farce. Especially early in the war, a lot of those people who formed Iraq Veterans Against the War, IVAW, which was modeled on VVAW, Vietnam Veterans Against the War, a lot of them were veterans of OAF 1 and 2, like 2003, 2004. And especially early in the war, there's a lot of chaos. And in the chaos, like rules and norms don't hold as well. And so it was very much like a free fire zone. But even later, and I wrote about this in my book a little bit, I actually cited some of the I cited like some studies on it or statistics. The number of people that the American Army was killing and Marine Corps was killing at checkpoints was absurd, off the wall, and it never made the news. It was never like a story. Should have been a scandal, right? It was like, in some ways, it was like our Battle of Algiers, like, the French indecency in Algeria, in that suppression of an insurgency for independence. Families were getting shot up at checkpoints because 19-year-olds from Alabama were scared, excited, and didn't know which side of the gun barrel to do what with, even though they're like trained, wonderful, fetishized soldiers.
And also the civilians.
There was no consequences. Like, and then if you killed somebody, it wasn't all that hard to close ranks, kind of like the blue wall of silence with the police, and be like, hey, here's the story. They ran a checkpoint, and I'm not saying this was like routinely done by everybody, but it was doable. I mean, in 2006, so we're talking 3.5 years into this war, I had to confiscate an AK-47 from one of my sergeants, who, if you met him, and he's still my friend, I don't know what that says about me, good one, and there's a whole backstory of him. If you met him, you'd be like, what a charismatic, kind guy. Mm-hmm. He's a great dad who basically raises his kid alone and is kind to everybody. And I had to confiscate an AK-47 that he had, which he called a drop weapon, which he carried around with him. So in case we killed a civilian, he could drop it next to the body, like sprinkling crack on somebody so you can arrest. Police do this, by the way, in America, right? The empire always comes home. But in other words, even 3.5 years into the war, that was routine enough that it was happening in my platoon. And when I found out that it existed, that this guy was doing this, I mean, and I was unpopular for it, right? I mean, I got away with it, right? I was able to like hold the platoon together for a number of reasons and make them kind of respect me, but it was a very unpopular decision. The easy move, by the way, not that I'm courageous, or otherwise I would have been a conscientious objector, but the easy move would have just been like, let it happen, right? Like, just let them carry it around, and you don't want to cause waves, you don't want to lose the loyalty of your people. But like, yeah, this was, and what my point is, banality of evil stuff. Like, this is a good guy in a million ways, but he thought it was okay to carry around an AK-47 in case we kill an innocent person, we could frame them. I mean, the uncritical, offhanded lack of thought to that, in a way, I think is the story. That's the story. It's always the story. The banality is the story. It was true of every crime, whether it was in Bosnia or you name it. It's the banality of it. It's the offhanded, breezy nature with which it's put in place. That's what scares me. That's what keeps me up at night.
And there's also the disgusting aspect of at least the mainstream media never fully showing the results of the atrocities the U.S. has committed in Iraq or other places, saying, we have to respect the rights of the dead. People don't want to see this over dinner or over breakfast. Respect the rights of the dead. You didn't respect them when they were alive, and now you're talking about respecting the rights of the dead because you don't want to make Americans queasy about reality over a meal.
Americans need to be made queasy. I mean, we are so brainwashed and propagandized to think that we're the good guys. You know, you're from birth, essentially. You are taught that the United States we're the good guys. We're spreading democracy and freedom and, you know, fireworks and eagles, and it's all good stuff. And, you know, Americans need to be shaken out of that because it is such bullshit. I mean, Jesse, you're right. They don't, the mainstream media is an unbelievable, the mainstream media is a danger to this country and humanity, period. You know, we talked a little bit about how they don't talk about collateral murder. They don't show the atrocities of war, the consequences of war. That's a real problem. And
They
the
will up
propaganda in
into a
this
point
country,
for entertainment, and then they
right?
censor what's
Well, yeah,
unpalatable.
you're right. They like very surface level. If they can use it as a talking point in order to fire up a certain element of the population against another certain element of the population, they'll do that. But they don't ever really examine what's going on beneath the surface. They don't ever really examine, you know, the imperialistic undertones and all. I mean, the normalization. I mean, this is, like I said earlier, this is where we come from. This is what we are. And until we address that in a real way and really examine you're right, the banality of evil in this
Mhm.
country, there's no, you can't change what you don't acknowledge. And if you're just gonna, you know, sit in your bubble and pretend like everything's swell and great and the United States is, you know, a bastion of diplomacy and democracy and freedom, we can't ever move forward. And the empire's failing. Like, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but it's not in great shape and it's only going to get worse. And yeah, Americans need to be made uncomfortable. They need to have reality shoved in their faces. Truly. I think
I,
that's what needs to
Yeah,
happen, to be shaken out of this,
and
whatever fog that they're in.
I think one way to do that, just going real quick back to the checkpoint murders, is to Google search the photographs of Gaith Abdul Ahad. I believe he's freelance, but he's done a lot of work for The Guardian, and he contributed to this book called Unembedded, which consisted of 4 war photographers documenting the early years of the Anglo-American War on Iraq, and he has taken a bunch of photos of people who have been Iraqis who have been murdered at checkpoints. And you might think it's like the movies. You see the bullets go through the windshield and maybe there's a little blood and the car crashes. But when you see photos of what is really done to people in these shootings, it'll keep you up at night. That's for sure. And he's captured that very I don't know what the adverb would be there, but it I think people need to see those photos because that again is it'll be they'll shove themselves in your face. There's really no way to ignore them, and you know, I think that absence of seeing the utter brutality and inhumanity of war is, I mean, it's been a huge problem for so long.
I think there are two components. First of all, I can't agree more. I don't care about politeness because under the veil of politeness, much murder is permissible.
Mhm.
And it has always been thus. I like rawness in human behavior. I think it's very important to know that. And I don't even really care if children see it. Like, I can be radical about this stuff. Like, I just think I watched Platoon with my then 11-year-old son, and some people were like, "Wait, there's a lot of like tough stuff. You really want your 11-year-old to see that?" I was like, "Absolutely, I do. Absolutely, I do." And I want him to ask me about it.
Yeah.
But I think what's interesting about this is like there are two angles of it. There's two angles. One is the obvious one. It is instructive indeed that President Bush went out of his way to change the policy so that we couldn't see even the caskets. They couldn't even be photographed coming into Dover, Delaware, the flag caskets. He went out of his way to do that, right? Like, either he decided unilaterally or someone even more evil and robotic with like whatever Terminator heart like Dick Cheney, someone told him to do it. He agreed. They went out of their way. If they did nothing, the rule wouldn't have been there. In other words, they took action to make sure we were not able to see even the caskets of our dead soldiers, right? That's instructive. But here's the part where I like to get even more controversial. I don't think most of the American people really cared. I don't think they wanted to see it. I think that they prefer the abstraction. I can't tell you how many times that people who are even near and dear to me, maybe even purport to like seriously like care about me. Okay, I'm dabbling in some dangerous territory here. Don't really like it when I share, or feel really uncomfortable if I tell true stories. And that tells me not with judgment necessarily. Yes, with judgment in terms of its dangerous ramifications, but it tells me something else about people, about comfortable people that are many thousands of miles away from abstract, increasingly abstract until they become invisible wars. I also think that the way we count is interesting. You know, Hitchens says, look to the language. I say, look to the numbers. I actually like numbers. I'm a liberal arts guy, but I think numbers are interesting. I love statistics. I love maps. I love things like that. Well, as of anyone who's listening to this can Google right now. If you type in how many people died in the Iraq War, you'll actually get a Pentagon official site. It's a defense.gov site that will give you the immediate release. It's called immediate release casualty status as of 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, March 29th, 2021. We know, because the Pentagon tells us to the man or woman, that 4,492 American service members died in Iraq during the official mission known as Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation New Dawn, which went from March 20th, 2003 until December 31st, 2011. In other words, we go to the single digit. We go to the last integer. We know exactly how many Americans died. Here's what we don't know. Nobody can agree how many Iraqis died as a result of our invasion. In fact, the range of estimates runs from the very low 0.5 to 0.75 million to up to maybe 2 million. I mean, if you Google that, you'll see there's like all different studies that make all different estimates.
Yeah, just to speak to that real quick, I was looking at the Movement for a People's Party platform last week because we recently did an episode with 2 former members who left because of systemic racism that's been happening within that so-called movement. And with regard to the Iraq War, they still cite over 100,000 unquote Iraqis have been killed. And there's no way that's even close to the total. And I remember when the Lancet piece came out in 2006 or 2007, dangerous and also a lie, a whitewashing that there are so-called progressive campaigns going around still citing this absurd and absurdly vague figure of over 100,000. Well, what's over 100,000? That could be 1 million.
Well, you know, I mean, there's indecency exists in the vagueness of the numbers, and it's instructive as to how we value life. I'm not okay with what I just described. Like, I'm not okay with the fact that we know that 4,492 jolly American boys and girls, apple pie and mama and all of that, died there. And yet, and I have a whole lot of feeling for those people, and many of them I know personally and dream about, even when I'm awake. Okay, I care about those lives. But I am not okay with the fact that we know that 4,492 of them died. And the delta in the range that will be cited in mainstream sources will be hundreds of thousands of difference between the left and the right number estimates. And I'm like, yeah, but our government did that. Because even if we didn't kill all of them in collateral murder videos, we illegally invaded a country, shattered a society, and we're responsible for the civil war that ensues that should have been predictable, and all the things that happen after that. Because when you go to war, you as a society have to take responsibility for what the ramifications are, because it was all done in your name. And I'll tell you, I mean, I'm sharing now. I don't know how to talk to people sometimes. I don't know how to interact in normal life sometimes. I can be horribly insufferable and exasperating because I'll be dancing to Phil Collins 1 minute because I have 2 ears and a
Great
heart.
choice.
Yeah, to steal from 30 Rock. And then the next minute, I'm like, it just hits me. I'm like, why is no one upset all the time about the indecency that I'm talking about? It makes me actually a really horrible person to be around in some ways, except I wonder sometimes if maybe I might just be right.
Right.
And
right.
It bothers me. And so like, I folks like us, we kind of like get outraged and stuff together, and it's cathartic. And yet most days I'll never quit, right? Because I'm very much a imagine Sisyphus happy type. But like most days I do wonder, like how in the world can we make folks care about, start with the collateral murder video, because I think people do like human interest stories where there's like it's small stuff. I think they like small aperture things, and then like broaden that out. And what does it say about our society that we kill with such carefree apathy almost? And we don't even know how many brown people died. And I wonder if it has something to do with the fact that they're brown and they're Muslim and they speak a different language. I know that it does, because I know that when ISIS did an attack in Belgium, the same day or within a day of a much broader suicide bombing in Turkey, that the names, faces, and exact numbers and like little bios of every one of those white and vaguely similar looking to us Americans Belgians was all over the news. And it was only on the Chiron that you saw like about 140 were killed in this suicide bombing in Turkey. Same perpetrators, right? Same, more human life lost in Turkey, and our media covers them completely differently, because every white and vaguely modern and European, and I'm modern should be very much in quotes, every one of those lives matters. Every one of them. People cared more about Natalie Holloway disappearing in Aruba. And by the way, I'm not in favor of people getting murdered while they're on vacation, but people cared way more about that or some pretty white cheerleader going missing or being abducted than they do by the fact that their government kills millions of people.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have stories. They don't have mothers. They don't have identities. They don't have dreams and hopes. And I know I'm being ridiculous in some ways, but maybe I'm not, right? And I just think that
I don't think that's ridiculous.
I don't think it's ridiculous at all. I think it's intentional too. I think it's very much a way of othering so that we can continue the brutalization of the globe. I think it's, the way that we, it's cliche to go back to manufacturing consent, but it's manufacturing consent. If you keep those people as others, as different, as less than, it's much easier to justify bombing them. And it's much easier to get the approval for that from the American populace. I mean, it's a very easy thing to do. And, we talk about how we don't really know specific numbers. Once again, I just want to give Julian Assange a big thank you, because thanks to him, we do have some more specific numbers. We do have some more. And I also should shout out the people at Iraq War Body Count, because they've done phenomenal work trying to nail down some figures as well. So yeah, you're right. It's disgusting that down to the very minute number, we know exactly how many Americans are killed. But everybody, it's like an approximation every time we talk about brown lives. It's like about 100,000. 100,000. Around 22 people were killed. Like it's never specific. We never see their faces. We never hear their stories or hear from their mothers about, when they took karate classes when they were, we don't hear any of that stuff. But when it's an American soldier, we get to hear all about their backstory and how they were in Boy Scouts and they used to help their grandmother by mowing her lawn or whatever. We don't get to hear those stories about brown people. It's very much a way of othering, and it's disgusting.
And it's from the same playbook that Israel uses. When one Israeli is even injured by a homemade rocket attack, which basically, if it hits nothing, will leave a pothole in the street. Yeah, we get to know all about their lives. Or if an IDF soldier is killed during an illegal invasion of Lebanon, one soldier, we get to hear all about that soldier. But you have hundreds of people killed, not just on one occasion, but 2 occasions at the UN compound, refugee compound at Qana in Lebanon, where Jesus supposedly turned water into wine.
Right.
We know none of their names, but for journalists like Robert Fisk, I know I keep bringing him up, but
often attacked journalists. He's not objective enough and all this, right? It's instructive the way they treated him.
Yeah.
After's dead too, though. That was always that. A lot of people gave him some shit when he was alive, but to see the attacks leveled at him after he died, what cowards!
Yeah,
that's gross.
Yeah, it's just those were just cheap shots by bottom feeders, in my opinion. But yeah, like you said, Misty, it's this othering and then this focus of attention on usually the perpetrator, the aggressor, as the victim, and we have to know everything about their life, down to what kind of cereal they like to eat. And it's it's a very sadistic form of Orientalism. I mean, I suppose all forms are, but this one is exceptionally sadistic. So
I want to write an article, or maybe I'll make it the title of a forthcoming book: Snowflake Nation / gaslighting as foreign policy, like about America. So what's interesting? I'm going to say something probably more controversial than anything I've said on your show so far. You don't know this probably, but the finality of disowning from my beloved uncle was largely as a result of something I said on maybe the first or second time I was on your show, when I said that I don't feel bad for cops and that I don't, I'm not as worried about their safety because you pick up a gun for the state, and I was comparing them to soldiers. Right. He had been a cop before he was a fireman, and man, boy, I did not like that, but I'm gonna say something even worse, okay? But it's not worse. I would like to start a petition for a memorial that is in the same vicinity as the 9/11 memorial at the Freedom Tower. Remember how upset everyone got when there was going to be even a mosque put in the area?
Yeah.
It was like a major scandal. Well, they're going to hate me even more because what I want.
Yeah, it was like Hezbollah was setting up their new headquarters in downtown Manhattan.
Never attacked the U.S. homeland, but I want to put them. I want another memorial of equal size. It actually will have to be bigger. I don't know how we'll find all the names. We'll get as many as we can. I want the names of all the civilians. We'll just do the civilians, right? We'll keep it polite. We'll just do the civilians. I want the names of every single civilian that we can come up with that was killed in the war on terror as a response to the deaths of our innocents. Mm-hmm. And what it would be, it would be a monument to the failure of revenge as a conception and of force. And I want it in downtown Manhattan, and I will not mean it as a disrespect to the dead. I put flowers next to Captain Marty J. Egan's name at the 9/11 memorial. I come from a family of firefighters and friends died there. And shoot, whatever. as if I couldn't make my point more clearly. I mean, this is Marty, right? This is the dearest of family friends, you know, in loving memory of Captain Martin J. Egan, March 17th, 2002, his first St. Patrick's Day in heaven. You know, I partied with this guy. He made fun of me. He was great. In other words, I give a shit about the people who died on 9/11, but I don't want to speak for his family. I don't even have the right to. But speaking for myself, I would suggest that there's a lot of families, even among those like 9/11 widows and stuff, who probably aren't okay with the fact that hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of straight up civilians died in our response, our ill-fated, ill-advised, and ineffective response to 9/11. And I think that a country that had even a modicum of decency would take seriously what I'm proposing and put a monument to our delusion and our vengeful carelessness. And I want it right around the corner. I want it closer than that mosque was going to be that upset everybody. And then, you know, then whatever, I can get death threats or assassinated in the street by a Proud Boy. But you know what? I think it's important. I really do. I think it's important.
Agree.
And
I agree.
By the way, I actually think that we should do that with names, just like the ones on the 9/11 memorial.
I agree. And I would sign that petition and then await the insane pushback that it would generate.
You're a masochist.
Bring it.
Yes, I knew that about you. Fatalistic masochist. We're like a bunch of Lord Byrons over here, except maybe.
But
Yeah,
but it
I'm
brings
used
up,
to it, dude.
it brings up a good point. Well, I you're Byron, I'm Shelley, so how about we do it like that? But it brings up a good point, or you know, sort of circles back to the point we were making before, is that people in general don't care about the dead of the others. And it's not only that they don't care, it's that they don't want to know. It's like a nuisance, like a horsefly buzzing around them while they're sitting by the pool. And I think that's where a lot of pushback for such a monument would come from. But I think underneath that, there's also the fact that they don't care about Iraqis. They don't care about Yemenis. They don't care about Syrians. And that could be for a complex of reasons. They're just not educated enough on what's happening, or they just don't give a fuck. And a lot of people just don't give a fuck, sadly, in my experience. So,
and if you bring it up, if you bring it up a lot, and let's say that maybe I do, even in my personal life, you're an insufferable bore to a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know? Give it a rest. I mean,
Yes.
even in like past relationships, you know, and I'm not talking about the most recent one, but even like in past relationships, I've been told things like, "You're too much," you know, and
I
like
get that a lot too.
Yeah.
I relate to that so hard.
isn't it? It's like terrible to even talk about because it's like raw, but I mean, but it's a thing, and I understand that one must compartmentalize, and I think I'm pretty good about, and that's where Phil Collins and my disarming dancing comes in. But the thing is, like, I actually do believe that this is something that we should care more about. I mean, it's funny that I just brought this up. Like, I've never really thought of it. Maybe someone's thought of it already, but like, I'm like pretty close to emailing Medea Benjamin after this and being like, let's talk about, you know, like, or, you know, or somebody who's like more like activist organizer with like some like broad network, and like, what, let's bring it up if for no other reason than to like upset people. And wouldn't it be interesting if the primary signers, the primary people like nominating this, were veterans of the wars that killed these people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not because veterans, we've talked about this, should always be the lead voices or we're better or interesting, but like just to really challenge the pushback before it comes. And it'll still come, and they'll swift the hell out of us. But like, it would be interesting, wouldn't it? Like, I think that would be fascinating. And maybe we'll get some, you know, and maybe get some 9/11, you know, families too, and be like, look, we refuse to be a monolith. We refuse to be a cliche. Maybe, you know, all soldiers don't feel like I do, but there are enough to challenge people's narrative. And that to me is valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And Yeah, I don't know what it's going to take to sort of reach a tipping point where empathy starts winning, but
Well, I think a big
we've got to
part of that is
try.
just getting the information out there. I mean, we're so
Right.
censored and there's so much narrative control that it's really difficult to even get people to examine reality. I mean, like we've said, people are extremely propagandized. They have genuinely the average American has no idea what's happening. They have no idea what's happening. They're busy. I mean, right now you have to work 2 or 3 jobs and you have kids and I mean, we're in a pandemic and there's just a lot of shit going on. And so people don't have the time. And when you have to legitimately dig for real information, who has that kind of time? I mean, other than people like us who are kind of obsessed about it. But the average American doesn't have the time to come home from, working a 12-hour day to spend, 5 hours digging into what's actually happening in the country and around the globe. So,
Mm.
I mean, that's really, I think, and again, I'm so repetitive, but that's why I care so much about press freedom. And that's why I care so much about freedom of speech and Julian Assange, because we cannot combat any other thing that we're dealing with unless we are able to have the access to factual information and have conversations with people we disagree with about things that we, may get heated over. But those conversations are conversations that need to be had. And we can't do that without, the ability to speak freely and, share information.
And
So as a way potentially to pivot to something else we wanted to talk about, if I may,
yeah, that's what I was
to
just
a certain
thinking.
extent, but it relates to exactly what Misty is saying, like, and both of you are, if wars like Iraq and Afghanistan where about 7,000 American boys and girls died, if indecency there hasn't really caught on the American radar, then the topic that I am most insufferable perhaps about, Africa, should really concern us and should particularly concern liberals or people who are willing to be critical of like the liberal establishment, the polite liberal establishment, as I always say it, which is my favorite pejorative. How in the world are we to expect that Americans are going to pay any attention to the petri dish / proving ground of war as abstraction, which is the continent of Africa, where America and France, in support of France, in support of the neo-imperial, neo-colonial empire coming back to control the colonies it never really gave up sovereignty to, talk about. How are we going to get people to care about 19 Malians that were killed at a wedding by a French airstrike that they lied about, that they're still lying about, that they're still denying, that the UN report just said was in fact mostly civilians? How are we going to, and America is killing people in Africa on the regular. In wars waged in countries Americans can neither find on the map nor pronounce in many cases. Niger comes to mind, and that's a very awkward mispronunciation. Be careful, folks.
Niger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I put some, yeah. How are we to get people to care about that? Because what worries me about Africa is I really believe that, and I blame this on Obama largely, by the way. I mean, Bush started the idea of having an Africa command, a separate Africa command, a militarized command for Africa. It's like an imperial proconsul who's put in charge of it, usually an army general, but sometimes it's an admiral.
Was that born out of going after Al-Shabaab?
Largely, it was. So the main theater of American counterterrorism, as they called it, in Africa, which was often just kind of like counter guerrilla, counter independent nationalism, not dissimilar to what we do in Latin and Central America, South and Central America. But that was the hot spot with Somalia at first.
Right.
We had always been operating kind of low, below the radar in the Sahel, so West Africa, which we've talked about. Those were and then of course Libya came later in 2011. Libya, by the way, Operation Odyssey Dawn was the name of it. What a fun name! What a fun name for shattering a country and then a continent as a result. It was quite an odyssey. Dawn of a New Indecency. That's what they should have called it. Anyway, it was like but it was originally kind of Somalia. But in other words, Bush comes up with the idea for AFRICOM. It's the Bush administration, but it basically goes into operation under Obama. And I think that the polite liberals, the liberal hawks, the liberal interventionists, the urbane imperialists, they saw
the power.
They saw it as a great place to test their new theory of war, their new method of war, really. And it's the one that I think we're going to see increasingly, which is total abstraction to the point of invisibility for us. It means almost no American casualties if they can be avoided. It means tech-savvy solutions, in quotes, drones, right? It also means outsourcing of the war to contractors. AFRICOM is like a mercenary command. AFRICOM is sort of American warfare outsourcing taken to its logical conclusion. You know, there's very few soldiers assigned to AFRICOM. They do a lot with very little. A lot of terrible things, by the way, with very little resources. There aren't a lot of uniformed soldiers assigned to it. And then it's the use of these proxies, whether they be like local militias or local human rights violating routinely security forces that we work through, coup artists, you know. There's been like 7 coups by U.S. trained officers in Africa since the founding of AFRICOM, twice in Mali. You know, once just this last August, and who knows that? No one cares. But like, this is a big deal. And my point is, with the collateral murder video, one of the things we saw was the years-long attempt to sort of suppress this story by the military and their complicit media allies and the administrations. But like, when America kills with drones or whatever civilians, the go-to reflex is to like, it's like, you know, what do we used to say, like, you know, deny, diffuse, counter accuse, like whatever, like that CIA, there's like a CIA slogan.
Yeah.
Yes. In fact, when a journalist went down to Central America to like report on the Contras back in the 80s, you know, when that death squad that we supported was murdering 100,000 people, literally one of the Contras in a training camp in Honduras was wearing a baseball cap given to him by his CIA trainers that had that phrase on it. It was like, you know, whatever it is, it's like, you know, deny, lie, counter accuse, you know, and he was wearing that baseball cap. I mean, wow.
I wonder if it was, I wonder if he got it in Georgia.
Right. Probably. So, and my point with it, I guess, is that France, the other empire, the second most expeditionary and imperially interventionist country in the world, people forget. The country that is most similar to us, which is why we can't get along, in my opinion, like two brothers who are just too similar, so they fight all the time, right? We're the two truly like universalist, exceptionalist, just sociopath countries. I mean, who have such a high view of ourselves. The French are amazing. They're a lot like us, really. I think that's why we fight so. Like they
shoot their protesters in the eye too.
Yeah,
dude, but the French are the gold medalist of protesters forever and ever.
Oh,
forever.
Absolutely.
It's amazing. Dumping steaming piles of shit on government buildings. Come on, I like their style. I like it.
Love when they like when they like change like in minor ways, like the work week length or like their benefits. They'll like start burning cars in the street, and like I love that. I'm like, we need to do more of that. Like, there's so much more inefficiency here. We don't even have a social safety net, so we're gonna have to burn down like cities or something, right? I guess I'm gonna go to jail now, but like, you know what I mean? Like, that's hysterical to me. I love the French. But their government and their identity overseas is very much like ours. I mean, they you know, they talk about American exceptionalism. You know, there's only a few countries that really have that sense of their own like messianic mission status for the world, and the other one is the French. I mean, there's this like French universalist thing. So my point is that the French universalist empire that's so similar to ours, just smaller now, their leadership, their polite liberal, quote unquote, president, Emmanuel Macron, has been lying and obfuscating and denying and then counter-accusing about this Mali airstrike. And it is not completely dissimilar to what we saw with the collateral murder video and thousands, maybe countless other examples of times that we either made errors or purposefully murdered civilians. And I just think I'm worried about Africa, because this is the largest French overseas military expedition, 5,200 troops right now, Operation Barkhane, which is in the Sahel, West Africa, 5 countries. The largest overseas deployment of French military forces since they fought to hold on to Algeria, 1954 to 1962, which was called the Savage War of Peace by the famous historian. I'm worried about it because France styles itself a world power, a great power, and they can't back it up. They talk a lot of talk and they can't really back it up. They just don't have the resources. And we know this because France was more bullish about taking down Gaddafi in Libya than any of the 3 main countries in the coalition, which was Britain, France, and the United States. France ran out of bombs within like days. And we had to literally like emergency rearm their air force with bombs so that they could bomb more Libyans and topple this government. And the reason I bring that up is France has delusions of grandeur that they are absolutely going to try to play out because they also suffer from the clinical disease of exceptionalism. But they're going to look for a Biden bailout. And Macron is going to, he's already made statements to this effect. I'm afraid Biden will give into it. I think he's basically going to say ISIS is on the rise in the Sahel, which is a farce we could talk about, but you can't let this, you can't let this continue, and we don't really have the resources. And for us to send 5,000 soldiers overseas is the equivalent of you sending 100,000 over, and we need help, and you should give us more support. And just like that, the war on terror that we don't even call the war on terror, it doesn't even have a name, the nameless war, the nameless, endless war that we're in, expands yet again. And that's what worries me. And that's the reason I bring up the Mali airstrike that the UN just reported did, in fact, despite the protestations of everyone in the French government, was, in fact, a civilian wedding. And
maybe we should like give a little bit of like what the Mali airstrike was specifically, because just for people who may not be familiar with it, it isn't getting a lot of coverage. But essentially, in the beginning of January, I think it was like January 3rd, if I remember correctly, a wedding was bombed, and the French are trying to claim that no civilians were injured and that it was very precise and it's all good, homies. And in fact, 19 civilians were killed, along with 3 potential bad guys. So that's what Danny is speaking to here. The UN released a report that is, showing that what the French are saying is, completely inaccurate, which is not surprising.
They're always described as Islamist militants.
Right.
That's all you get.
It's that language again that Danny always talks about that I love. It's language. That's,
well, how do you
how
know
they get away with these things?
How do you know they were? Can I have at least one item of evidence?
And again, bombing weddings. I mean, isn't that so Western? It's great.
Well,
like it's like a Western pastime.
Well, that goes back to I think France probably is borrowing it from the US, the patterns of life protocol, if you will, that if there's a certain amount of males of a certain age collected in a group,
some of them have to be bad,
say for a wedding party or a funeral procession, that's all that's needed to carry out a drone strike. As far as I know, that's still the protocol, and the president signs off on that. Anybody who's seen Citizen 4 about Edward Snowden, like toward the end of the film, they show kind of on a piece of paper. I think Glenn Greenwald hands it to, or Snowden hands it to Greenwald, something like that. But it has like a little diagram of the chain of command and who finally signs off on these drone strikes, and it's the president. So now it's Joe Biden.
Look, America's first Black president who had an African father is the very president who held clinical, lifeless, dead shark eyes meetings called Terror Tuesday meetings to pick targets to kill with drones. And without even digging into whether or not there's value in assassinating quote unquote terrorists overseas, which is dubious, but let's just table that. It is very instructive that the arsenal of democracy and the indispensable nation, all the other things we call ourselves, would even occur to us to have something called Terror Tuesday meetings, where we just pick out targets for assassination.
Mm-hmm.
I think what's interesting about the French thing that is like worth mentioning is like France never gave real independence to its sub-Saharan African colonies, and most of them all became independent in 1960, the very same year. More countries became independent in 1960 from colonialism than any other year in general. The British gave some independence in 1960. It's like an obscene number. It's like 17. It's ridiculous. It's very weird. When they did that, they forced their former African colonies, with one exception, which I'll mention, which was Guinea. They forced their former African colonies to basically sign secret agreements with them. Well, one was secret, one was not. The secret one was France will have the right to have bases in their country and to deploy troops there and at will, and basically run their foreign policy. So they'd be more like autonomous than independent. They would be given, UN status, sovereignty, but not really. But the other one was they had to use the sub-Saharan French, the African franc, the French African franc. They had to use their currency, and they still do. The CFA, called. And in using the franc, not only do the French have some control over their currency, they actually have to keep, it's recently changed, but it used to be like over 50% of all of their reserves in French banks, and then they can't know what France is doing with it. So France like plays with their money like a mutual fund manager, really.
Yeah,
and then, like
kind of like Israel plays with Palestine's money.
Yeah. And they control their economy. So what you have is a situation where France controls their economy and controls their national security, in the process backing the most horrifyingly grotesque leaders, so long as they're pro-French, and actually conspiring to assassinate the ones who show any independence. And now they're back fighting the vaguely Islamist outgrowth of resistance to the system the French put in place in the first place 61 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And no one in Washington is talking about that, because we don't really want to solve the root problems in Africa. We're happy to fight the symptoms. It's forever war, and it's super profitable. And I'm not afraid to go down the seemingly conspiratorial lane, because I don't think it's conspiratorial. I think it's rather overt that war is profitable, and the military-industrial complex needs forever threats and to our supposed security. And you asked about the targeting.
Absolutely.
Well, first of all, we're never going to get any evidence as to how they knew. It's a catch-22 situation, just like everything that comes out of the U.S. CIA stuff. Like they'll say, I was just reading a report on Africa, like a press briefing on AFRICOM. Please allow me this last indulgence, right? So this is Mr. Godfrey and Mr. Gonzalez, who they both work in the State Department on Africa. And this reporter, I love the British one, a British reporter, right? He says, hi, sorry if this is a naughty question. I literally wrote, that's my favorite impolitic but important question construction in recent memory. Real evidence of the links between ISIS and the insurgents in Mozambique beyond just these reported pledges of allegiance made 18 months ago. This is what Mr. Godfrey says. He's not a Pentagon guy. He's a State Department guy, but they're all militarized now. He says, one of the sort of truisms of doing counterterrorism work is, unfortunately, a lot of the information that we rely on to inform our assessments isn't the kind of thing we can discuss publicly. But I would say that the evidence of ties between ISIS and these groups is quite incontrovertible. That is catch-22 brought to life. You can't know because it's too secretive to know, but you should also trust us because I told you should believe me. And that's the way that, that's the way it works with these airstrikes. But the last thing that's interesting is France can't run its Operation Barkhane. It can't run its massive war in West Africa, that's the largest in 60 years in its history, without American intelligence and logistics support. We fed their guys around in airs, and we feed them intelligence. And they only started using their own drones last year. Before that, we not only handed them the targeting info, which is to say wiretaps, human intelligence, but mostly technical intelligence. We feed them literally to the tune of millions and millions of dollars a year. Costs money. AFRICOM feeds them the intelligence that the French then used to bomb these insurgents. And then when the New York Times reports on it, they report on it as though it's a discreetly French problem. Like,
Right.
oh, the UN says France bombs civilians. What they don't tell you is it's very likely that the intelligence that they used came from American intel analysts who fed the data to them, who fed them the supposed reason for this killing. And that's what worries me about the whole Biden bailout thing.
Yeah.
I'm going to grab my cord, believe it or not. But I can hear you. My laptop's a little low.
Okay.
We could probably
I was gonna
start to
say,
wrap. Yeah, I don't want to. Are you gonna get one more thing?
Yeah, we can of course wrap up. I think I had
No, I could talk to you all day.
Yeah,
so...
we'll do it again. I mean, I think people probably lose some interest after a certain point. But I appreciate you being able to bring up like the Africa connection to this collateral murder video, because I don't think anyone else is going to raise it. Not because I'm so smart, just because most people don't see connections everywhere, and I do, and it's like a problem for me. But like that briefing that I'm telling you,
I relate to that so hard.
and there's a Danny, I don't know if you've read it, but there's a good New York Times piece that I linked to after I read the one you sent me, and it talks about it's titled something like France's Forever War in the Sahel, and it's a sort of a photo essay. The photos are actually very good, and I think it's an instructive read, both in describing what's happening, what the French are doing, and how pointless it is in Africa. And it's also instructive in what we were talking about before with who are worthy victims and who aren't. And there's throughout the piece an obvious focus of concern on the tally it's taken on France and not the people of Mali. And we should say this is not just confined to Mali. There are surrounding countries that Niger, for example, that are also being infested by these legionnaires. And France is spending $1 billion a year on this. But the point I wanted to make is that take a look at this piece and look how just ridiculously equipped the French legionnaires are, both in terms of their vehicles and what they have to carry when they're out on foot. Just logically, sending somebody out into the desert with all that gear it doesn't make any sense. And I'm sure you're familiar with that, very familiar with that. But also, there's an aerial picture that's taken of part of the Sahel. I think it's in Mali, and it's just utter desolation. And I think I was saying to you earlier, I don't know if I said it on the show or before we started, but it's like these French Mr. Beans in uniforms just bumbling around in a desert, totally unconnected to the people. They don't speak the same language. A lot of the people are nomadic families. And, in January, Macron threatened to pull out of Africa and then was swayed back into doing it. And so now it's just like, we'll just keep throwing more military assets into Africa, and eventually it'll fix the problem. And it's like, dear fucking Lucifer, did you not learn anything from Algeria or
any number of other?
Yeah.
And that parallels what's happening in Iraq and Afghanistan as well. It's pointless. utterly pointless. But the problem is that
It's profitable.
It's profitable, and not only are the soldiers or the mercenaries fighting there dying, the people there are dying, the civilians are dying, and that's the most important thing I think we should keep in mind. And but the utter pointlessness of it is it's sickening, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when your government either kills or outsources its killing of civilians in a place that people can't even vaguely find on a map is actually like the definition of obscenity, as far as I'm concerned, and not caring about it is even more grotesque. That article you're talking about, I believe, is written by Hannah Armstrong, and it's called like France's Forever War in the Sahel.
Yeah,
read a lot of articles like that, and I recommend people read it. It's a good piece. It's a good mainstream media piece as far as these things go. It asks some tough questions, and I want to give her credit for that. Because it's easy to hit mainstream media, and they deserve it all the time. But it's a good piece. People have called the war in the Sahel Operation Barkhane, which started out as Operation Serval just in Mali in 2013. So it's about 8 years old now. It's regularly referred to in media and even in France as France's Afghanistan. That's interesting. And it's actually gone through a lot of the same cycles. It's like a microcosm. It's like a micro version just because it's smaller, because the French military is smaller and their capacity is smaller. It's a microcosm of our forever war since 9/11. It's even followed a lot of the same patterns. Like in early 2020, France surged 600 extra soldiers, I believe, into Operation Barkhane, bringing the number to the highest rate it's ever been, which I think is 5,200 soldiers. It used to be 45 or 4,600. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot of soldiers, but again, when you look at the size of the French military, it's a lot. It's actually hard for them to maintain. I mean, they're maxed out essentially, right? And there was a surge, and the surge had no effect in the long term. In fact, violence has gone up in a lot of ways, no different from our surge, where there was an initial dip in violence, but then the outgrowth was ISIS, and it didn't really solve the underlying problems, because France is under the same delusion of the United States, which is that if you like yourself enough and you talk yourself up enough as exceptional, right? If you're cocky enough a hegemon, then your bombs can create democracy, solve climate change, which is desertification is a major problem in West Africa, right? And also, feed the people. I've called in a lot of bombs for my sins, and none of them had that effect. I never saw one just like explode into like bread and grain. And you mentioned Kana, right? Like where Jesus turns water into wine. Like I've never seen napalm turned into wine, and it just doesn't work. And by the way, the French literally dropped that, right, in West Africa. So it's an outsourcing, though. It's an outsourcing. Sometimes concepts, and I really will like end my Africa like rant with this, but sometimes concepts have very broad implications. In other words, it's a cliche now. Most people do realize, anyone who reads the news, even in mainstream media, knows that America outsources war to mercenaries, security contractors. They call themselves PMOs, right? Private military organizations. Like just gross, lifeless language. Going back to the language, call it what you are. Say you're a mercenary.
Well, Jeremy Scahill.
He's on my shit list today, by the way. Free Daniel Hale. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. Daniel Hale, for sure. Why? Is he saying not to free Daniel Hale?
No, he's likely the person who got Daniel Hale busted. So, fuck Jeremy Scahill. Yes. And free Daniel Hale.
Okay. Well, this wasn't meant to be praise for him. Just to say I like the chapter title in his book, Blackwater, The Horrors of War. That's what I prefer to call the mercenaries.
I like that.
Yeah, I like that. That's good.
That. Yeah.
I'll give him credit for that, but still fuck Jeremy Scahill. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
I'm feeling feisty about that today.
What is with the Intercept and getting all of its sources?
Dude, they're
jailed.
State propaganda. They're Piero Amidiar. Come on. It's ridiculous. That's not a legitimate outlet. If you're going to leak something, whistleblowers, please go to WikiLeaks. Please go to WikiLeaks. Do not go to the Intercept.
They're definitely intercepting.
Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Like, go to WikiLeaks because you have courage, but expect to be abducted from an house. Like,
I mean, they have burned at least 3 sources in the past 4 years. Do not go to The Intercept ever.
Yeah, reality winner.
Yeah.
Yes.
Daniel Hale.
So
go ahead, Danny.
if I can make this like the like my last, I've never said it like this before, but I'm like working through something that I think will be useful about America's.
I think 2 more questions though about Africa.
That's all right. So let me just say this, and then I'll add some. I've got a little more time. The outsourcing that people know about is the functional tactile one, where it's like we have these jobs that used to be done by soldiers and now they're done by mercenaries, right? But actually, I would argue that America's outsourcing of war is much broader and conceptual and philosophical, and it gets big. And Africa, as always, I really believe is like the testing ground for a lot of this stuff. It is the petri dish for a lot of our indecency. So, especially our future, like abstract indecency. We're not probably going to do an Iraq invasion again anytime too soon. Although now that I said that, we'll probably be doing that. But I don't know who it's going to be. Syria, Ukraine, who knows? But we outsource the war in the Sahel because there's not a lot of stomach for sending 5,000 Americans anywhere right now. Like we'll surge small amounts of American soldiers places and piecemeal, but there's not a lot of stomach politically for big invasions or.
Are there about 5,000 in Syria right now?
It's less than that, but there are thousands in Syria. Yeah.
Okay.
And they're like mainly guarding oil wells at this point. But we outsource the war in the Sahel to our old buddies, the French, the neo-imperial former colonizer, which in some ways would be the worst person to outsource it to, right? Because it viscerally resonates negatively with most of the people of the Sahel because they think of the French as their like slave holders, because that's what imperialism was in Africa. But we outsource to the French, we back them up in the shadows, enabling them. Like they're like the alcoholic adventurists of empire, and we're the enablers, right?
Yeah.
But then they outsource it to these local proxies, the most obscene of which, and I wrote an article about this called "We Need to Talk About Chad," which I thought was funny because of like the frat boy name part. But like the country of Chad, which is run by probably one of the most brutal dictators in the world and the second longest serving president in the world since like 1990. They provide France and mercenary. They basically outsource their army to France, which is being outsourced by us. And so you see how this and that army, of course, is committing massive human rights violations. It's deployed all over Africa on behalf of France and on behalf of us, and no one ever questions it. And then if there's any threat to this guy Idris Deby, who's this horrifying murderer of a dictator, then the French will actually literally bomb the rebels in order to keep this monster in power. And my favorite anecdote of the Obama administration is no longer the assassination of American citizen Anwar al-Awlaki without any due process, but it's this.
And his son.
And then his daughter was killed in a Navy SEAL raid.
Yep.
Later during the Trump administration. Yep. So we just wiped that family out without any due process. Sorry, our great legal litigious country.
Hey, war is hell.
Yeah. This is something that people don't know about the Obama administration. It's my new favorite anecdote since I found it out. When Deby was fighting like a proxy war with South Sudan or Sudan, I can't remember which one, and I apologize for that. It was common knowledge that he was using child soldiers in that fight as like corollaries to his army. Like he was actually using child.
Who is this?
This is Deby, the president of Chad that France backs up.
Okay.
So he was fighting some sort of proxy war and was using child soldiers, common knowledge that he was. Well, there's statute law in the United States that we can't provide military aid. It's like part of the Leahy laws, sort of, but it might be something a little different. But if a country is using child soldiers, we can't provide them military aid. But we think it's really important to provide Chad military aid because they're our favorite mercenaries. They outsource their army to us and to France and then to do our bidding. So the Obama administration actually they did like a waiver to that law in order to allow us to continue to provide support for Chad. So I want to say again, just like the first mother to ever be Secretary of State said it was okay to starve 500,000 Iraqi civilians with sanctions, the first African president of America did a waiver to make it so the most brutal dictator in Africa could use child soldiers against other Africans. Like, wow. If that doesn't,
I did not know that.
If that doesn't, yeah, I'll send you an article where I source it from somewhere else.
Yeah, please do.
If that's not it, if that's like decisive, drop the mic, then you don't have a soul, right? If that doesn't tell you that America is a delusion that needs a systemic uprooting and upheaval and just change, right? Then I don't know what's going to work. I wrote that out, but this will do it. This will change everything. Nope.
Yeah, that's something I definitely did not know, and atrocious.
Yeah.
Characteristic of Obama, but
yeah, I mean, he did destroy Libya, so and brought slavery back to, what was the most flourishing country in Africa.
yeah,
Thanks, Obama.
Which
Fucker.
Well, it gets to one of the last questions I want to ask, but first I just want to read from this New York Times piece that I mentioned earlier, just to drive home what I was saying about the utter pointlessness of this French attempt at imperial conquest, or its neocolonial conquest in Africa. It's pretty short, but here we go. But General Pascal Facon, the commander of the French mission, said in an interview that European and African armies could, quote, easily, unquote, conquer the Islamic State in the Greater Sahara. Unlike the Islamic State at its height in Syria and Iraq, ISGS does not hold any territory and has no long roots in local communities, he said. Quote, we shouldn't underestimate them, said General Facon. We shouldn't underestimate them, unquote, said General Facon. Quote, we shouldn't give them too much importance either, unquote. It's like, what's the point? You can't have it both ways. I mean, that you shouldn't have it anyway. You shouldn't be there anyway. But that it's not tautology, but it's like, that equivocation, that just vague equivocation and manipulation of language. I think just speaks to, again, the pure pointlessness, imperial pointlessness of what France is trying to do in the Sahel and probably other parts of Africa as well that we don't know about yet.
I mean, France, pretty much the whole like Western bump, of Africa was all French. I mean, Francophone Africa, as they call it, is a very important part of the French great power delusion. And to show how different motives overlay, and there's always like an economic determinism to it, and it's not pure determinism, but there's an economic element. Okay, and Africa plays into all this, there are three main reasons or three things that buttress France's argument that it's still a great power. What are they? Okay, one, the fact that they have veto power as a permanent Security Council member at the UN, which is an actual time capsule to 1945. And even in 1945, they were defeated. Like they weren't that powerful. They weren't powerful enough to deserve permanent Security Council status, which don't even think should exist. Like, I don't think some countries should just be better than others because they have more nukes, That's one thing. But the thing that people don't ever realize is they have more than just their one veto vote. They've controlled the votes through pressure, that economic and military pressure I talked about in their constitutions of these countries that they gave limited sovereignty to in 1960. They control an entire block of countries, their former colonies, that always vote with France. So that's part one. So this shows you how Africa plays into all of their imperial delusions. The second one is the basing. France is one of the only countries that can deploy thousands of troops overseas independently. It has some airlift. It has some expeditionary capacity. There's only a few countries on the planet that can do like what we do in Afghanistan. France can do it on a small level. Russia can do it on a small level. Even China can only do it on a small level. China doesn't even really try. They don't really have a lot of expeditionary operations. Britain can do it to a certain extent, maybe a little smaller than France. France is a little more militarized than Britain even. But so that's that. But the third part that's important, France holds on to its great power delusions, independent even of the United States, petulant in a way, because they have a independent nuclear capacity, an independent nuclear program. So they have nuclear weapons, which they see as like a deterrent, the ability to like basically call bull on anything because they've got nukes. But in order to have the independent nuclear capability, meaning that they can resource it themselves, they need uranium. They need an independent source of uranium. Where is most of the uranium in Africa? Niger. Niger, which just had an attempted coup, by the way, 2 days ago after an election. And so is it an accident that France has 5,200 soldiers based in Chad, is the headquarters, and operating in 5 countries? Mauritania, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, and Chad, all former colonies. And it's not an accident that France has maintained such strict military and economic control over a place like Niger, because it requires that uranium to maintain its independent nuclear deterrent, which it sees as what makes it independent even of America, because it can, that's why it went that third way during the Cold War sometimes, where it would like not, it pulled out of the NATO stuff and pull out of NATO to pull out of like the independent command, because they were like, hey, we've got our own deterrent. This is pretty nefarious stuff, and no one ever talks about that because no one cares to learn. But this whole thing, the enabler in our personal lives gets a lot of blame. Like if you enable an alcoholic or you enable someone who's abusive or whatever. But we never talk about the fact that our government is like the great enabler of indecency in Africa. And I think we should.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Agreed.
And not that we have to get into it, but I think it's worth mentioning, or is absolutely worth mentioning, that a lot of what France's neocolonial conquest has destroyed in the Sahel, and what it's done in the Sahel has driven, exacerbated extremely the migrant and refugee crisis to Europe, and also those migrants and refugees who get trapped in the slave trade in Libya trying to make it to Europe. So there's another connection there that is super important if you care about human beings. But I think that's we could make that a whole other discussion, and we've had you long enough, so we can leave it there for now.
We'll definitely have you back for sure. I mean, obviously.
I'm gonna hint at like a next appearance. I'm gonna make like literally a minute, two points to keep an eye on. I like saying that to people. Keep an eye on this, right? Keep an eye on the fact that it is recently reported in the New York Times that the CIA has opened the 3rd American drone base in Niger. There are now 3 just in that country. Keep an eye on that because we fly a lot of the surveillance and even armed drones that enable the French war out of nearby Niger, which mostly operate in Mali. And the second one is we just deployed a Green Beret A team, just like the Mr. T show, to Mozambique, because supposedly, there's an ISIS affiliate down there. But of course, all they do is copy and paste mainly the franchise name of ISIS, and then we have to go fight them, right? Very convenient for us and our intel agencies. But this is the first time that we've put U.S. military troops really in southern Africa. Traditionally, the one part of Africa we didn't really play in, at least with our soldiers. I mean, we enabled apartheid down there for quite some time, but was southern Africa. We really never really went south of the Congo with our military. AFRICOM never really played down there, but we just put a small number of Green Berets down there. And I would say keep an eye on that, because what that shows us is that the kind of like nice, endearing Uncle Joe Biden that we're told about is expanding America's war on Africa and Africans in new ways that are unprecedented. In Mozambique, I fear those 12 Green Berets and that A team and all the assets they bring with them, because trust me, Green Berets have a lot of air assets, a lot of logistics assets backing up. That could be the foot in the door to an even broader expansion into southern Africa that we've never seen before, and that's squarely on Biden. That's squarely on him. Trump didn't do that, right? In other words, that's new. Obama didn't do that. He did. So I'm gonna keep an eye on those 2 things. 3 drone bases just in Niger, which people can't find on a map, and Green Berets in Mozambique that barely anyone's talking about, but they probably ought to watch.
Yeah, Absolutely.
Excellent. Yeah, I'll definitely keep an eye on that. Yeah. But before we let Danny close out with all of his information, just another friendly reminder that Monday, April 5th is Collateral Murder Day. We are doing a tweet storm. Please participate. I'm going to be blowing up a lot of people, so join me. It'll be fun. Yeah, so that's definitely something. And again, April 11th is the 2-year, will mark the 2-year date of Julian Assange being kidnapped. So also we have events planned all over the country, all over the globe. Participate in those if you're able to, or create your own in your own little hood. It's a good time. So yeah, Danny, thank you so much for joining us. Let everybody know where they can find you.
I have one more thing to add.
Oh my God, dude. Every time.
It should be noted that while the French are using mercenaries in the Sahel, the U.S. contingents that are there are not just grunts, they're special ops troops. They're the best of the best, if you will. And I think that speaks volumes to what the U.S. goals may be there. So I just wanted to add that in there for context. And
as ever, the hypocrisy is strong because there is a slew of reports coming out of think tanks and West Point's Combating Terrorism Center and a bunch of other places that are wailing on and on about how, oh my God, Russia has all these Wagner Group mercenaries in Africa. It isn't that terrible. And I'm like, pot, meat, kettle. I mean, it's ridiculous. But anyway, so the hypocrisy is strong, right? I'm in favor of Russian mercenaries, but like it's very odd that like the mercenary nation and mercenary command of AFRICOM is like loud, the lady doth protest too much kind of thing,
Yeah.
But, no, thanks so much. And as for what Misty was saying, like skepticalvet.com is my website. I try to keep it simple, at skepticalvet on Twitter. Everything comes through there. And check out the Eisenhower Media Network. We got a website up now. That's that organization that I direct, where we take anti-war vet voices from, sergeant to colonel and to the major general, in fact, and just try to get in the media and yell about these things. So always enjoy these conversations. Totally awesome. I have almost an hour to read more about Africa before I go to pre-K pickup and put my double life hat on and be a dad. But this is always fun.
And don't forget about Danny's new book that's coming out on June 1st, True History of the United States. I'm sure we'll have him back on before then. But definitely keep your eyes out for that. And once that comes out, we'll definitely be having him on to talk about it for sure. So again, Danny, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for everybody for watching, and we will catch you next time.
Thank you.
Take care.